The half-sister who was never really ours. How a recorded share transfer made the whole store mine at the 40th anniversary. The pen slides across the counter toward me. Dad's counter, the maple one he sanded by hand in 1986, and Sven's finger pins the signature line like he's crushing a bug. "Sign the release, Gertie," he says, and his voice is smooth as the lacquer on a Yamaha he'd sell you at full markup. Behind him, the wall of guitars ticks softly in the heat, 40 of them on their hooks, strings expanding, a low metallic settling sound, like the whole building is clearing its throat. I can smell the cherry vanilla ghost of Dad's tobacco still soaked into the oak shelving, 3 years after we buried him. Sven pushes a stapled stack at me, Dad's letterhead, Dad's signature, a date in March when Dad was already too weak to hold a spoon. "You've got no claim on Lindqvist music," he says, loud enough for Nadine at the register and the 2 customers by the amps to hear. "Let's just be honest in front of everybody. You're the half-sister who was never really ours." The store went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when someone drops a full tray. What Sven didn't know, what he'd never once thought to check in 41 years of assuming he was the only real Lindqvist in the building, was whose name the state of South Dakota already had on file. Let me back all the way up, because a moment like that one only lands if you know how far it fell from. I was born in Aberdeen, South Dakota in the winter of 1968, in the old St. Luke's before they tore the maternity wing down. My mother, Karen, was Dad's second wife. Sven's mother, Britt, had died of a brain aneurysm in 1965, and Dad, Nils Lindqvist, a quiet Swede with hands like catcher's mitts, married my mother 2 years later, when Sven was 4 and I was not yet anything. So Sven was my half-brother by blood and my whole brother by the only childhood either of us got. We grew up over the store. Literally, over it. A 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of the building at 214 South Main, with the smell of rosin and wood glue coming up through the floorboards and the sound of somebody downstairs trying out a fender in the afternoon. Lindqvist Music opened on October 12, 1985. I was 16. I remember because Dad let me letter the price tags in silver paint pen the night before, and I did 200 of them, and my hand cramped into a claw. We sold Hohner harmonicas and Bundy student clarinets and sheet music in oak flat files, and Dad rented out beat-up cornets to every 4th grader in the Aberdeen public schools who couldn't afford to buy one. It was never a rich business. Some Decembers it was a good one, $40,000 in a single holiday month, back when a Silvertone amp cost $180. And some Februaries we ate a lot of tuna casserole. But it was ours, and by ours, I mean the whole family, and the word never had a crack in it back then. Here's the part Sven forgot, and the part I never advertised. When I was 19, in 1987, I didn't go run off. I stayed, and I did the books. Not the fun part of the store, not the guitars, not the drum kits Sven loved to bang on for customers. The books. I taught myself double-entry accounting out of a $22 paperback from Kessler's downtown, and then I got my associates in accounting from Presentation College over on North Klein. Night classes, 2 years, while I worked days at the store and nights waiting tables at the Flame. By 1994, I was a licensed CPA. By 2001, I had my own small practice, Lindqvist Bookkeeping and Tax, 3 rooms above a state farm office on 6th Avenue, 11 regular business clients, and a reputation in Brown County for reading a contract the way a jeweler reads a stone, slowly, under a light, looking for the flaw. That is the seed. Hold on to it. The daughter who did the books. Sven, meanwhile, was the front of the house, and God, he was good at it. 6'2", a laugh you could hear across the store, could sell a $3,000 tailor to a man who came in for a set of $9 strings. Customers loved him. Dad loved him, in the uncomplicated way you love a son who looks like you and laughs like your dead first wife. I didn't resent it. For a long time, there was nothing to resent. Sven ran sales and I ran the ledgers, and Dad ran the soul of the place. And on Sundays, we all ate pot roast at Mom's until she passed in 2009. And even after, we still did, at Dad's, until it was just the three of us, and then, slowly, the wrong notes started. You want to know the first wrong note? I can tell you the exact day. March 3rd, 2011. I was doing the store's quarterly reconciliation. I did it free, always had. It was family. And I found a cash drawer shortfall. Not huge, $1,140 over the quarter. Sven had a story. Register glitches, a bad batch of tags, a customer refund he forgot to log. I believed him. I actually believed him, and I fixed the entry, and I moved on. Because that is what you do for family. You extend the credit. But I am a bookkeeper, and a bookkeeper never truly deletes anything. I made a note in a manila folder I kept at my office, and I wrote the date, and I wrote the amount, and I underlined it once. Just once. I didn't know yet what I was building. I only knew the number was wrong, and the man who told me why was too smooth telling it. The second wrong note. Christmas 2013. Dad, 79 by then, wanted to formalize things. He was tired, his hands shook. He'd started forgetting where he put his own tobacco pipe, that cherrywood pipe he'd smoked on the loading dock every evening since before I was born. He called a meeting, just family, at the kitchen table upstairs, the same table. He said he wanted the store to go to his kids, both of us, and he wanted it done right, on paper, so nobody could ever fight about it. Sven jumped in fast, too fast. Said he'd handle the paperwork with a lawyer. Said I was busy with tax season. Said don't worry about it, Gertie. And I remember Dad tamping that pipe against his palm. Tap, tap, tap. Not lighting it, just holding it, looking at Sven a beat too long. Dad didn't say anything, but he looked at me across the table and something passed between us that I didn't understand for another 6 years. I let Sven handle it. That was my mistake, and I've owned it. Third wrong note, and this one I couldn't sand over. Spring of 2015. Nadine Alvarez, our clerk since 1998, a widow with a voice like a gravel road and the most honest hands I've ever known, called me at my office on a Tuesday, crying, which Nadine did not do. Sven had cut her hours from full-time to 29 a week. 29. 1 hour under the line where the store would owe her health benefits. She'd been at Lindqvist Music 17 years. She'd covered the counter the week Dad had his gallbladder out. And Sven looked her in the eye and told her it was just business, nothing personal, and scheduled her for 29 hours and hired a 19-year-old part-timer at $8.50 to fill the gap. I drove down and sat with Nadine in her Corolla in the lot behind the store, the car that never started on the first turn. You had to give it a second. And I told her, don't quit. Whatever happens, don't quit. I need you inside. She didn't understand why. She trusted me anyway. Write that down too, because it matters at the end. Nadine stayed. The fourth note wasn't a note. It was the whole song going wrong at once. Dad died on June 9th, 2016. Pancreatic. Fast, at the end. And I was there, and Sven was there. And for about a week around the funeral, we were brother and sister again, in the old clean way, standing in our black clothes at Riverside Cemetery, and I let myself forget the manila folder. Then the store didn't close for grief, and Sven changed the locks for insurance reasons. And the will read simply, the house to be split, the personal effects divided, and the store, Lindqvist Music, to pass per the ownership arrangement already established. That phrase, per the ownership arrangement already established. The lawyer who read it, a nice, tired man named Bergstrom, looked up and said he assumed we knew what that meant. Sven said, we do. I said nothing, because for the first time I realized I didn't. And I saw Sven's jaw do a small thing, a tightening, that I'd been watching for since 2011 without knowing it. Then came the years of erosion, quiet and grinding, 2016 to early 2024. Sven ran the store like a man who'd stopped believing anyone was watching. He stopped doing the free family reconciliation with me, hired a strip mall tax outfit instead, Halverson and Reed, who wouldn't return my calls. He took a $6,000 management draw that showed up in the one bank statement I still had eyes on before he moved the accounts. He let the instrument rental program to the schools die. That program, the cornets for the fourth graders, the thing Dad started it all for, because it was low margin. He sold Dad's workbench, the one from the back room, to an antique picker for $400 without telling anyone. And somewhere in there he started saying the thing, the little poison at family gatherings that got smaller every year. Well, Gertie's not really in the business, you know. At my cousin Elon's wedding in 2019, drunk, to a table of relatives, I heard him say it with the addition that would become his favorite. Half-sister, technically, different mothers. She was never really part of the store. I did not throw my wine. I want you to understand the discipline of that. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, and I felt the old cold come down over me like a shade being drawn. The same cold I get when a client's numbers don't add, and I just know that somebody's lying, and the proof is somewhere in the file if I'm patient. I smiled at my cousin. I complimented the cake. And that night I drove home to my little house on North Arch Avenue, where the porch light had been flickering for a month because I kept forgetting to buy the bulb. And I sat in the dark on the steps under that stuttering light, and I thought, he keeps telling everyone I'm not really family. He keeps saying it. Why does a man need to keep saying a thing that's true? Men repeat the lies they're most afraid of. That's the whole trick of them. Now here is what I never told Sven, never told the cousins, never told anyone but one person, and I'll get to her. Back in the spring of 2014, 4 months after that Christmas kitchen table meeting, Dad had called me at my office, just me. Said, "Gertie, come by Bergstrom's on Thursday and don't tell your brother." I went, and in that little office over the flower shop on Main, my father, clear-eyed that day, one of his good days, signed a document that transferred 60% of the ownership shares of Lindqvist Music, Inc. to me. 60%, not split, not equal, a controlling interest to his daughter, the one who did the books, the one he'd watched Sven watch for 3 years with that tightening jaw. He said, and I wrote it down that night so I'd never lose the words, "The boy loves this store like a toy. You love it like a ledger. A toy gets broken, a ledger gets balanced. I trust the one who counts." And then Bergstrom did the thing that would end everything. 4 years before Sven ever thought to forge a page. He recorded it. He filed the stock transfer and the amended corporate ownership with the South Dakota Secretary of State in Pierre, and he registered the share certificate, and he sent me a certified copy in a flat envelope that I put in a fireproof box in my office closet behind the 2011 tax files, and did not open again for a long, long time. Dad said, "Keep it quiet till you need it. Maybe you never will. Maybe the boy grows up." I kept it quiet. I kept it quiet through the funeral and the locks and the school program dying and the workbench sold and every half-sister, technically, at every shrinking holiday. I kept it quiet for 8 years. Because here is the plain truth of it, said the way I'd say it to a client across my desk. On paper, filed with the state since 2014, I already owned the controlling share of Lindqvist Music. Everything Sven did after Dad died, the draws, the locks, the forged release he'd eventually slide across the counter, he did to a store that was already, legally, mostly mine. He just didn't know it. He'd never checked. Why would he check? He was the real Lindqvist. I was the half-sister who was never really ours. So when he slid that pen across Dad's maple counter in front of Nadine and God and 2 guitar customers and said, "Sign the release, you've got no claim," the reason I didn't sign, the reason I didn't cry, the reason I picked the pen up and set it down gently and said, "I want to read it first, Sven," in a voice so calm it scared him a little, was that I already knew what he was about to find out. But knowing isn't the same as proving, and proving isn't the same as ending it clean. So let me tell you how the machine started. It started with a phone call on the morning of April 2nd, 2024, the day after he pushed the pen at me. I called Margaret Steckel. Steckel is a corporate litigation attorney out of Sioux Falls. Sharp as a fresh reed, 66 years old, 3 decades of untangling exactly this kind of family business knife fight. And I'd done her firm's books for 6 years without either of us ever needing the other for anything but numbers. I sat in my office with the fireproof box open on the desk and the certified share transfer in my hand. Dad's real signature, Bergstrom's seal, the state's recording stamp, and I told Steckel the whole thing, start to finish, 2011 to yesterday's pen. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Gertrude, do you understand what you're holding?" I said I thought I did. She said, "You're not fighting for a claim. You already own it. He's the one who's been trespassing. What did the release he tried to make you sign actually say?" I read it to her. And that's when it turned. Because the release Sven drafted referenced the seller's full and sole ownership of Lindqvist Music, Inc., his ownership, and cited that stack of papers on Dad's letterhead dated March 2016, the ones with Dad's signature, transferring the store to Sven 3 months before Dad died. The papers Sven had handled, the ones that made him the sole owner, the ones that contradicted a document already sitting in the state's records in Pierre since 2014. He forged a transfer, Steckel said slowly, to give himself a store you already controlled. He didn't just cheat you, he committed fraud against a corporate record. "Gertrude, I need 3 things." She told me the 3 things, and this is the quiet part, the patient part, the part with no shouting in it, and it took 11 weeks. 1. The recorded transfer, authenticated. Steckel's paralegal pulled a certified copy directly from the Secretary of State's Business Division in Pierre. Not my copy, the state's copy, dated April 2014, 60% to Gertrude Lindqvist, recorded and time-stamped by the government itself. Independent of anything in my closet, unassailable. 2. Proof Sven's papers were forged. This is where being the daughter who did the books stopped being an insult and started being a blade. I still had the manila folder, the $1,140 in 2011, and years of scraps after. But the killer was simpler. Sven's forged transfer was dated March 14th, 2016. I had Dad's medical records, which Steckel subpoenaed, showing Dad was admitted to Avera St. Luke's on March 9th and did not leave, sedated and failing, until hospice at home on March 22nd. A handwriting examiner Steckel retained out of Minneapolis, a calm woman named Dr. Fenwick, who charged $3,400 and was worth every dime, compared the March 2016 signature to 40 verified samples of Dad's hand and to the tremor in his real signatures from that period. Her report ran 19 pages. Its conclusion took 1 line. The March 2016 signature was a simulated forgery produced by tracing with high confidence. Dad could not have signed it. Dad was in a hospital bed with a morphine drip. Sven had traced their dying father's name to steal a store from a daughter who already owned it. 3. An ally on the inside who saw the daily reality. Nadine. I drove to her apartment on a Thursday in May, and I finally told her. The whole thing. The 2014 transfer, the box in my closet, all of it. She sat at her kitchen table with a plate of ginger cookies going untouched, and she cried again. The second time in 10 years I'd seen it. And then she wiped her face with the heel of her hand and said, Gertie, I have kept every schedule he ever posted, every one, in a shoebox. Because after he cut my hours, I stopped trusting a single thing that man said, and I thought, someday, somebody honest is going to ask. 17 years of loyalty and one shoebox of evidence. She had the 29-hour schedules. She had the day he told her to lose a $2,300 cash sale off the books. She had notes on the school rental instruments he'd sold off privately. Nadine had been quietly keeping the real ledger the whole time, the human one, and she handed it to me across a plate of cookies neither of us could eat. Steckel filed nothing publicly. That was the strategy, and it was hers, and it was beautiful. No lawsuit yet, no warning shot, because Sven had planned something, and we were going to let him walk right into the middle of his own stage. The store's 40th anniversary, October 12th, 2025. Sven had been planning the anniversary party for months. It was his kind of thing, the front-of-house showman's dream. He'd rented a tent for the parking lot, booked a bluegrass trio, invited the mayor, invited the Aberdeen American News, printed banners, Lindqvist Music, 40 years, family-owned since 1985. He was going to stand up in front of the whole town and give a speech about legacy and family and his father's dream. He'd even, I heard through a cousin, planned to announce a founder's plaque with his own name on it as the man who carried Nils Lindqvist's vision forward, sole owner, real Lindqvist. He'd invited me, too. A text, 3 words, "You're welcome to come." Magnanimous. The half-sister, welcome to come to the store that was hers. I texted back 1 word, wonderful. Steckel and I picked that day on purpose. Everything was ready. The certified state record, the forensic report, the medical records, Nadine's shoebox, and one thing more. A document Steckel had drafted and I had signed. A formal notice of majority ownership and demand for control, complete with a resolution removing Sven as an officer of Lindqvist Music, Inc., effective immediately, executed by the 60% controlling shareholder, me. It was legal the second I signed it, but Steckel said, don't serve it at his house. Don't serve it at a lawyer's office. Serve it where he told the town you were never really family. Let the record correct itself in the same room where he lied. So on the evening of October 12th, 2025, I put on a plain navy dress and I drove down to 214 South Main. And I brought one thing with me from home that wasn't a document. I brought Dad's pipe. I'd taken it after the funeral, the only thing I'd asked for, the cherrywood pipe with the tooth-worn stem, and I'd kept it on my office windowsill for 9 years. And some evenings, when a client's numbers wouldn't balance, I'd pick it up and turn it over in my hand, and it still, faintly, after all that time, smelled like cherry and vanilla and Dad. I put it in my coat pocket that night. I don't fully know why. Maybe because he was the one who'd signed the transfer. Maybe because I wanted him in the room. The tent was full, 200 people, easy. String lights, the bluegrass trio sawing away, the mayor with a plastic cup of cider, the newspaper photographer Nadine behind the old maple counter where she'd stood for 27 years, watching the door. Sven was magnificent, flushed and loud, working the crowd in a sport coat, and at 8 o'clock he tapped a microphone and the trio stopped and he began his speech. He thanked the town. He thanked my father Nils, who built this with his own 2 hands. He talked about legacy, and then he found me in the crowd, and he couldn't help himself. The poison was too deep in him now, and he smiled and said into the microphone, warm as anything, and I even see my half-sister made it tonight, Gertie. Not really in the music business, but she's always welcome in her brother's store. Her brother's store, in front of the mayor, in front of the newspaper. I want to tell you about the cold that came down then, because it wasn't rage. It was the cleanest, quietest thing I have ever felt. I felt Dad's pipe in my pocket against my hip. I walked up through the crowd, and I did not raise my voice. And I said, Sven, before you give anyone a plaque, there's something the whole town should probably see, since you brought up ownership. And I nodded to the back of the tent, and Margaret Steckel came forward in a gray suit with a leather folio, and she introduced herself, clearly, as an attorney, and she said the sentence I will hear in my head on my last day on earth. Mr. Lindqvist, my client, Gertrude Lindqvist, has held the controlling 60% ownership of Lindqvist Music Incorporated, recorded with the South Dakota Secretary of State, since April of 2014, nearly 12 years. The tent didn't gasp. It just went quiet. That dropped tray quiet, the same quiet from the day of the pen. Sven laughed. He actually laughed, that big front-of-house laugh, but it came out with a crack in it now. No, that's not. I own this store. Dad signed it to me. I have the papers. The papers dated March 14th, 2016, Steckel said, and she laid Dr. Fenwick's report on the counter. When your father was under sedation at Avera St. Luke's, unable to sign his name. A forensic examiner has concluded that signature was traced. The genuine transfer, the recorded one, predates your document by 2 years. She set down the certified state record next to it, the government's seal facing up under the string lights. Your father gave majority control to your sister. He recorded it himself. It has been the law of this company the entire time you've been sitting in the office. I watched the blood go out of my brother's face. I have never seen anything drain so fast. He went the gray of old wax, and his mouth opened, and no showman's laugh came out this time. And he looked down at the 2 documents on Dad's maple counter, the counter Dad sanded by hand in 1986, and he understood, all at once, that every day for 9 years he had been the guest in a house he thought he owned. He grabbed the state record. His hands were shaking. 200 people watched Sven Lindqvist read the recording stamp from Pierre and go from a man giving a speech to a man who couldn't stand up straight. You forged our father's name, I said, and I said it quietly, just for him, though the tent was silent enough that everyone heard. While he was dying, to take something that was already mine. And then you spent 9 years telling this town I was never really family. I took Steckel's folio and I laid the last document on the counter, the resolution, my signature on it. This removes you as an officer of the corporation, effective right now. You have no authority here as of this moment. Margaret will walk you through the rest. He begged. I'll give the town that memory, since he tried so hard to give them another one. He said, Gertrude, we can talk about this. We're family. We can work out a... And I watched him reach for the word family, like a drowning man reaching for a dock. The word he'd spent a decade telling everyone didn't include me. I said, now you want the word. You couldn't say it sober at Ellen's wedding. The mayor set down his cider. The newspaper photographer, to his eternal credit, did not take a picture. He just lowered the camera and looked at the floor, which is its own kind of verdict. Nadine behind the counter put her hand over her mouth, and above it her eyes were shining, and she was looking at me the way you look at weather clearing. Steckel handled the rest in 3 weeks, and it was, as she promised, clean. The forged March 2016 document was void on its face against the recorded 2014 transfer. There was nothing to litigate. You cannot unrecord the state's record with a traced signature. Sven's own attorney, when he finally got one, advised him to sign the settlement and not go near a courtroom, because the words on the table were felony forgery of a corporate instrument and forgery of a dead man's signature. And Steckel let it be known, gently, that whether Brown County ever heard those words depended entirely on how quietly Sven left. He left quietly. He signed away his minority 40% for a buyout of $95,000. Fair, more than fair, more than a forger deserves. But I wanted him gone, not ruined, and there is a difference, and Dad would have known the difference. He moved to Fargo. He does not have a music store. He sells cars now, I'm told, which suits the smoothness fine. I own Lindqvist Music. All of it. Free and clear as of November 2025, 60% by my father's hand and 40% by my own checkbook. And there is no longer a single share in this world with Sven's name on it. The first thing I did was give Nadine her hours back, full-time, with benefits, retroactive, and a raise to $24 an hour, and the title of store manager, because she had managed the honest part of that store for 17 years without a title or a thank you. She cried the third time, in my new office upstairs, at the old kitchen table, and this time I let her, and I did not tell her not to. The second thing I did was bring back the school rental program. 40 cornets and clarinets and flutes went back out to fourth graders in the Aberdeen Public Schools this past January at $15 a month, most of it charity, and I don't care. Dad started this store to put a horn in the hands of a kid who couldn't buy one, and Sven let that die because it was low margin. I brought it back the first week I could. That's the generous act, if you need one named, and I'd rather have it than the buyout money twice over. We had a small dinner in the store after closing on a Friday in February. Me, Nadine, Margaret Steckel, old Bergstrom the lawyer, still alive and delighted, and Aylin, my cousin, who'd watched Sven insult me at her own wedding and never forgotten it either. We ate pot roast, Mom's recipe, on a folding table between the guitar wall and the maple counter, and the guitars ticked softly in the heat the way they always have, 40 of them, clearing the building's throat. Steckel raised her cup of cider and said, "To the half-sister," and she smiled and finished it, who was always the only one who really was. The insult inverted. I'll keep that one. After they'd all gone home, I stayed in the empty store a while, in the dark, with just the counter light on. I took Dad's pipe out of my coat pocket, the cherrywood one, the tooth-worn stem. 9 years on my windowsill, and it still, faintly, smelled like cherry and vanilla and him. I turned it over in my hand the way I'd done 100 nights when the numbers wouldn't balance. They balance now. There's a little rack behind the counter where Dad used to keep his pipe during the day, a shallow oak cradle he'd screwed into the shelf himself, empty for 9 years, because I could never stand to see anyone else's anything in it. I set his pipe in the rack behind the counter of the store that's mine.